All right, so we'll jump in. So this meeting is about land use and development, and getting into sort of building off of the last discussion about architecture and design, and we talked a little bit about some of the site-specific kind of things in that discussion, and so we'll really expand that and continue that talk. What we want to start to understand is when it comes to actual layout of new development, um, beyond just the design of the building. How is the zoning ordinance working for you? What are the shortcomings? What are the pitfalls? Is development, sort of giving you that place that
Yeah.
people think about as Columbia?
So, one of the pitfalls is the zoning code just really doesn't address much on some of the developable nature of land and how the character of that land is maintained. I mean, if you wanted to, you could, and we see it, come through and, flatten a place out and throw pad lots on it as much as you want. There's no no requirements or percentage, slopes that are, not buildable or, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I came from Knoxville, and you can build on any slope you want to there. You just have to do it correctly. But I guess part of that is doing things correctly, like you were talking about in relation to the architecture. You give everybody enough freedom and no one learns, but restrict a little bit and you can start working in the correct direction. I don't know. What do you have?
Well, older zoning areas, they're residential homes in GCS and IG, which is not some of the older stuff.
Well, could you phrase the question again for Austin?
Oh yeah, just trying to think about what is not working well in the current zoning, what is working well, giving you the types of places that you want to see, or that the community wants to see, or that Connect Columbia requires.
That's simple. I mean, the Columbia being an older town, we have, maybe back then, everything was given these zoning districts that were basically, I think, based off the corridors that they served. And you have all of these just big swaths of zoning districts that are all non-conforming. For example, we have a huge industrial zoning district by the railroad tracks just near Carmack, and it mostly consists of single-family residential, and there's a few industrial buildings in there, but there's a lot of single-family, and then there's a lot of commercial zoning, GCS, which is basically like a suburban type zoning district that you see on James Campbell. We have that right here just south of downtown, and it's all single-family residential that's non-conforming to that zoning district. And it kind of creates a challenge for staff because, let's say you have a house that's in industrial zoning, the house is zoned industrial, and they want to build a residential accessory structure on it. Well, the house is non-conforming, so, you see where I'm getting at? There's a lot of challenges, I think, that we pose and how to best way to approach that.
Right. What did you guys make of my comment last night about that we've not seen a place nearly quite as patchwork as Columbia with your zoning districts?
30-something zoning districts.
Oh, I agree. There's just and there's like there's one called MCD, and then there's MRC, and one allows residential, but it's unnecessary. There's just way too many zones.
Yeah, and they seem to be just scattered randomly. That's really the thing. We've seen places with lots of zones before, but not so.
I think maybe. And you probably see this in a lot of older zoning codes when they made the zoning code. they would just look at uses and kind of just zone them based off what the use was at the time, and maybe that's why you see so many just kind of scattered and thrown out
Yeah.
there.
It could be. It's wild. I guess one of the other things that I'm wondering about is, we talked about the comprehensive plan being, a guiding vision document, but do you think that most people read that document and come away with a clear vision of the physical form of the future of the city?
No, because there's nothing for them. It's all bulk and use standards. Well, what uses could go in a district. It doesn't really delve into. I mean, there's things in there. There's comments in there about make sure things connect and things like that, but it's not design centric at all.
It's not specific enough too. The classifications of the different future land uses.
It's wide open.
They're not specific enough. It is open to interpretation, and they're actually conflicting in a couple different places, which makes it hard. It also, they're not really reflective, in my opinion. The different definitions of some of those future land uses are not. They're not reflective of the way that development is going. And it just doesn't, to me, it doesn't make an abundance of sense the way some of those are classified. But
so we shouldn't be too worried about exactly what it says about the intention for future this and that and the other, insofar as character goes.
I mean, that's my subjective opinion. Paul would have to speak to that, or Austin on.
What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I think the character definition's in there for a reason, but unfortunately the zoning ordinance is not really giving a lot of direction, feeding off of the Connect Columbia plan. It doesn't give you the tools to accomplish what Connect Columbia is really asking for. From the character standpoint, and I think when you look at that ordinance, you were talking about last night all the different zones of where you hit the nail right on the head when you said that, but there's very little differences, and I think that's why you see so many different colors on the map, because MCD allows this, but MRC allows this. They're almost identical other than one thing, so they had the zoning for something completely different, which created another color on the map there. So you just have years of that's come up. I think also the hierarchy of the zoning ordinance is something that we would really like to look at. Is that we had talked about it a little bit before. Is that to us it doesn't make a lot of sense why you have 3 different industrial districts and your most intense one doesn't allow the least intense industrial use. And you have that same flow all the way through everything. Whether it's residential or commercial,
Right. Yeah, one of the things that we've been looking at here recently, we've been on a comp plan where we're starting to venture into the zoning side of things. We've been thinking about, there are areas right now that are industrial, but the industrial uses are kind of, heading out of the city. It's not really something they're trying to get more of, and so the idea would be to allow for those areas that are currently industrial to widen the array of uses that are within that sort of comprehensive plan industrial future land use district, to allow everything from residential to mixed use, so they can easily transform in the future and use those kind of zoning or have those kind of uses within it. And obviously there's a certain amount of common sense where you say, well, if it's heavy industry or dangerous or whatever, we can't have people living next to it. And I think that a developer would agree with that. And if the developer is dumb enough to do something that the market won't support, then that's that too. You're not going to have the conflict that people always say, well, I'll get calls saying that they're making noise in the industrial area. And it's like, well, if you move into this industrial district, that, and you probably have something to do with the industrial side of things. Like maybe you're a maker or something, you want to do some kind of artisan industrial kind of stuff. But anyway, so it allows for that industrial kind of maybe for example, what you're saying, Paul, of why would the heaviest industrial not allow the lightest industry as well?
Yeah, and I think, well, it's just an old school of zoning in the fact that we're separating things out to the max. But in doing that, we've really limited ourselves in having those mixable areas that create that look or that vibe that we're trying to achieve. We're just hindering ourselves every time we start to separate out, such a wide distinction between one and the other. It just, and next thing you know, nothing really ever works or flows well together. Because like you were talking about last night, you have these pods of everything everywhere, and that's what we're creating.
Yeah. Well, and this goes back to some of the stuff we were saying with the design standards is, we know how to simplify it, and we can do that all day long. And you guys know probably how it should be simplified too. But when we show somebody a new use table and a new zoning map, are people going to, elected and appointed officials who have to adopt it, are they going to be able to wrap their mind around it and get on board with it? Or are they going to be so, in love with the old use categories and all that they're not going to be able to make that shift?
I think most people don't realize what each zone allows and doesn't allow. I think they only know residential and commercial and industrial.
Okay.
So as long as we're keeping our language in that form of text that is familiar to people, I think people can relate that they know commercial is commercial, but they don't realize there's 8 different types of commercial zones. And I think that frustrates people too, and us too. I mean, we see lots of places where we're like, that doesn't make sense, or that shouldn't go there, but the zoning doesn't allow it. And so yeah, as long as we don't get too far from just simple text of commercial, industrial, residential, I think we'll be fine on that part.
Bill?
Okay.
Bill, it's Sue Stevenson. Can you hear me?
Yes. We can hear you.
Okay. As I said before, I am an elected official and I represent the public. I represent the people. And one of the main things I want to share is that the city of Columbia does not always follow their zoning ordinance or their comprehensive plan. And I think part of the reason you have so much scattering is because there is continuous rezoning. If it complied with the comprehensive plan, you wouldn't have to rezone it. If it complied with the zoning ordinance, you wouldn't have to make changes. You wouldn't have to amend the zoning ordinance and amend the comprehensive plan, which is done all the time. And so even though I, on occasion, have read verbatim out of both the zoning ordinance and the comprehensive plan, both the Planning Commission, the Municipal Planning Commission, and the City Council have gone ahead and approved projects that completely conflicted with both the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance. And I can remember the very first day that you spoke, Bill, you made the point that the zoning ordinance is a legal document, and it is. And the comprehensive plan was adopted by the City Council. And so constantly in the paper, you see amendments to the zoning ordinance and the comprehensive plan. And for instance, recently, an area that was zoned suburban neighborhood, which only would allow for low and medium density, was rezoned to suburban corridor to allow a residential multifamily zoning district in there. And so, and that was surrounded by single family homes and large parcels. And even though it clearly did not comply with the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance, it was approved. And so they actually have now proposed to build 10 of 11 three-story apartment buildings right on top of single-family homes. And that's the kind of thing that really angers the public. Yes, they get an opportunity to speak at both the Planning Commission and the City Council, but yet everyone is totally perplexed as to how both of these bodies can ignore what is clearly in the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance. And that is a huge problem, because I frankly made the statement, if you're not going to follow your zoning ordinance and you're not going to follow your comprehensive plan, then don't waste the taxpayers' dollars putting them together. If these are documents you're going to approve and the guidelines that you're supposed to follow, don't waste taxpayer dollars putting them in place and actually hiring consultants and paying for consultants like you to put together these plans and then not follow them. And then the public's only recourse, yes, you can appeal, but who can you appeal to? The zoning coordinator, the zoning director. And beyond that, their only other option is to take it to court. And the main thing I want people to understand is that these are people that have lived and worked all of their lives to purchase their land and to build their homes and to improve their property. And suddenly something like this goes right on top of them. And there just is not enough consideration for the public and what you're building right on top of their backyards or right across from them. That kind of thing has not been respected, and it happens all the time. In fact, I looked up how many times the zoning ordinance and the comprehensive plan here in Columbia is changed. I don't have the figures in front of me, but it's constant.
Yeah, well, and I think too, when you see, you know, the number of PUDs that you have within the city, I mean, it's, you know, essentially it's saying, well, there's the zoning, yes, but let's do a PUD to do something different than that. And you know, I see that, if I remember correctly, that even in the plan, in the comprehensive plan, it actually refers people to a PUD as a preferred way to do certain things. So that is tricky unto itself, for sure. I think that, you know, when we're looking at kind of how much the code or comp plan is adhered to, it's funny because it depends on, in a lot of cases, who you're talking to, you know, because I was talking to somebody who was saying, you know, well, the city listens so much to the residents that you can't be sure that what you're trying to do is going to happen. So in that case, it was the opposite perspective, but nonetheless, the fact that we even have the two opposite perspectives, or that people even have opinions about that, is a problem unto itself, you know. So, and hopefully through this process, we'll get it all sorted out and all cleaned up, so that it's clearly unnecessary to have a discretionary subjective process and decide whether or not we're going to do this or that. And, you know, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, you know, why update the documents? Why change it if you're not going to follow them? So I hope through this process, not only will we make sure that the document and the zoning itself is simple enough that it just seems nutty to do something besides follow it, but also give everybody the fortitude and that's why I keep mentioning it. You know, I keep saying, well, what about the elected and appointed officials? Are they going to be on board with this too? Because they may say, you know, yes, we are happy to hold people to a set of standards, but if we're writing those standards right now, let's make them so wishy-washy or so watered down that it's not going to, you know, be a real standard anyway, or real helpful anyway. So we just want to make sure that we're always, you know, touching base with everybody. So I'm thankful that you're here, Sue, to plug in with us and give us that perspective. Hopefully others will will join in this discussion.
There's one thing that I noticed when I look at the comp plan versus the zoning ordinance right now, and that's that the current zoning ordinance and the way things are zoned aren't consistent with the comp plan. And that's not from necessarily from zoning changes. It's more, I mean, some of it is obviously, but it's more from the fact that the zoning hasn't followed the comp plan yet.
It's older than the comp plan.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things that we're trying to get rectified is have a zoning ordinance and have the zoning map where it takes into account the comp plan like it was intended to do when the comp plan was written.
Paul, have you, currently the way we annex things in is it comes in, with the base annexation of RS40. Have you considered, does the comp plan extend to the growth?
It extends past the corporate limits.
So, I mean, if you have you thought about just adjusting when you annex something in the base zone that it comes in with? Is that?
Well, yeah, I mean, if it's RS40, it's pretty rare. I think it's only happened a few times over the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
But typically when it comes in for annexation, they're going to tell us, we're going to rezone it to this, whatever it may be. And that's where the comprehensive plan kind of comes into play. I can only remember a handful of times where actually the comp plan's actually been amended. What happens is the certain areas of the city have that, Brian, we already talked about it, that area of change overlay. And so that area of change is what council is referring to, giving them the right to really openly modify the comprehensive plan, because at the time of its creation, we knew that this area was going to be continually changing and morphing into different things. And that's why they put that in place there. So yeah, I think some of the things that we've been looking at is that we used to have a RS15, a 15,000 square foot lot that we considered to be low density. But when that 15 went out of the zoning ordinance a number of years back, that the 10 was still sitting there, and somehow or another it got a low density. So when you look at the comp plan, you're looking for something in the rural area. Well, a 10,000 square foot lot is considered rural. And I think some of the descriptions on some of the different zones that we have should better meet with the comprehensive plan and what it's trying to achieve.
You guys talked at all about the idea of having new development have a mix of densities rather than being a monoculture?
In what way?
Well, for instance, we did in Franklin, didn't we? Sure. Basically,
a mixed district.
Yeah, you can't just have 200 units or 100 units or even 50 units of all lots that are the same size. So you'd have a mixed product neighborhood essentially. So you'd have lots of that are 10,000 square feet, and then you'd have a range of single family lots, and then you'd also have some things besides single family. So you'd have some townhouse, and you'd have some maybe even like apartment house, like a small neighborhood scale apartment, 6-plex, 8-plex buildings, all within the same neighborhood, designed cohesively, and with neighborhood open space and all that. Basically everything short of having a neighborhood center with commercial.
Yeah, especially on the north side of town, that's what we would really like to see, because of how far it is away from any real amenity, so to speak, that they kind of be almost more self-supporting in some way, and then also have that diversity of housing in there. Unfortunately, right now we're going to kind of getting, one parcel might be single family, the parcel next door to it might be multi-family done by somebody different, and the two don't always mix very well.
Yeah, and that's y'all's zoning map generally, Paul. It's you can see some kind of themes that are in it or were in it at some time, but there's some of it just seems like it's fragmented in an unusual way, like where you might just have somebody to, like Susan was talking about, where you're in a generally single family area, and then all of a sudden there's one of the RM districts dropped in there. So that's I think there's an opportunity here to do some cleaning up on all of that. Careful cleaning up, I'd say.
Well, the other thing too is, I would expect, because builders do what they do, not all single family builders can build multifamily or can build, row houses or whatever. And so by requiring that new development have that mix of densities, you do several different things. One is you certainly make sure that new development isn't just, like I said, a monoculture of sort of sameness. The other thing you do, and that adds to that sort of overall image and character of the community. The other thing you do is you are, by providing a diversity of housing types, you're starting to work towards your goals of having a range of price points because of the size of and the types of buildings. And that addresses some of your needs for, workforce housing or new starter homes or whatever the case may be. Then the other thing that it does is to really make sure that you guys are more resilient during economic downturns, and the developers are themselves. Because a lot of times developers, believe it or not, as much as they focus on the market and getting things right, they'll do it, until they can't do it anymore. But they a lot of times will get so fixated on one particular product as, oh, this one's working, I'm selling this, and all of a sudden you have a downturn or something shifts, and now they've got this whole subdivision of this one thing, they can't sell it. If you had, a percentage of this and percentage of that and percentage of the other, you actually can absorb your whole neighborhood faster and get, which protects you from, the shifting market. Now, what you'll see if you do that is you still will have builder this builds the multifamily, and builder that build the townhouse, and builder that build the single family. They'll just have to figure out how to work together. So they'll do deals together, but the neighborhoods, the subdivisions themselves will be designed as a whole, instead of an apartment complex being designed and then the townhouse will be designed next to it and then single family being designed next to it. So you never have a sense of cohesiveness or neighborhood or anything like that. And so just sort of shifting that still allows each of those different builders or developers to do their thing, but it gets that collaboration to happen through the zoning. And they'll brag about it to start with. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. I mean, that's what we've been trying to kind of ask for. And so far, we've been able to get it to that scale, but occasionally we'll get a win here and there. But no, I really like approaching it from that standpoint, because that's what we keep in our mind. That's what we keep missing, is we're getting locked into one style of development. It's going to come back and bite us.
Yep.
Bill?
Yes. This is Brian. Bill's my dad. He's next to me here.
Okay. Well, hello, Bill. Hello, Brian. And I'm going to be completely honest with you and tell you what's going on, because a lot of people within the city limits are contacting the county and their county commissioners, and they're actually looking to get out of the city limits and to make sure that they're not in the city's urban growth boundary, because they're just completely disgusted with all the high density, and with high density that's being put right on top of them. I mean, single family homes that are 1 acre, 2 acres, 5 acres, all of a sudden has things like a 3-story apartment complex on top of them. And the thing is, in the current zoning ordinance right now, which you and I both know is law, it clearly says that this zoning ordinance is supposed to assure that there's a prevention of overcrowding of land and undue concentration of structures, and that what is built should be in relation to the land that surrounds it. And in your land use, in the current land use plan, it says that development, annexation, and development should be compatible with the surrounding area, particularly the contiguous area, and that it should follow the character area matrix. And this is ignored all the time. And people should not have to move. And that's exactly what they're doing. When these things happen and there seems to be no recourse other than trying to go to court, these people are now telling us they're going to move. They're just going to get out of the city limits. They're going to make sure they're clear of the urban growth boundary. And that's because all this high density, yes, I mean, 98% of the time what you're seeing proposed is high density. Not everything has to be high density.
Right.
I rarely hear anything about open space or greenways, open space that's truly open space, not detention ponds or retention ponds that are factored in open space. And so I'm just being brutally honest with what's going on. But the public is disgusted with these documents not being followed.
Great. No, that's good. That's what we need is to hear that, you know, sort of what the community is saying. So thank you for bringing their voice here. One of the things that I'll say is, and just to further clarify, because sometimes when we talk about this idea of mixed density neighborhood, and you heard me say the word apartment, I used the qualifier neighborhood scale, and then I talked about 6, 8, 10-plex buildings. Apartment complexes in and of themselves are, you know, tend to be incompatible with just about everything because of the scale, the design, the layout. I mean, if you think about amazing, beautiful historic neighborhoods around the country, around the region, they had multifamily built into them right next to even, you know, the mansions, and it all fit in together. But once this idea of the apartment complex came into being, it's kind of like what we talked about in the last meeting, this idea of the front-loaded townhouse in a suburban context. It's like you get neither the town nor the house, but it's called a townhouse. And so a lot of times people have a negative reaction to those as well. If it's, you know, these big buildings, garden style apartments with just sort of random parking lots all around, the buildings popping out of them, absolutely. You know, I think that anyone would be concerned if that popped up next to their house on an acre or 2 acre, 5 acre lot. One of the things that we're going to be focusing on through this discussion is the idea of context and character as the actual zoning designation or zoning districts. And within that, the context and character zones, you have certain things that are, you know, contextually appropriate in their scale, in their design, in their placement on the site. And, you know, I mentioned last night that you didn't used to have buffers between things because they understood and appreciated that. And even in places before they had, you know, they didn't even have to have zoning to get that right. It was just common sense and obvious to them. And we've lost all of that knowledge, and so now we have to zone for it. The real question becomes, how much of the city has to be left to sort of conventional suburban practices in that way, in the old way of doing things, that versus where it can really focus on character and form and all of that as the way to think about growth and development in the future. So that you have civic space as a valuable component, like I mentioned last night, designed into a new, like, get away from the idea of subdivisions. We're designing and building neighborhoods, right? And so that's the real question I have, is I know there's a desire for it, and in visual preference surveys in every place we go in the country, and the same would follow in Columbia, people would pick a true neighborhood over subdivision. When I say true neighborhood, you have, even in a neighborhood that's a large enough scale, you have 1 acre lots, and at the edge you might have a 5 acre lot, an estate that's kind of a, you know, at the hinterland of the neighborhood. But within that same neighborhood or development, you'd have 1/4 acre lots and 1/10 acre lots, and, you know, everything in between. And so how much of Columbia do we think has to just kind of continue to be developed in that sort of suburban way that came, you know, sort of 50s, 60s, 70s, and is now sort of falling out of favor as the way to go? Anybody?
Well, Brian, you know, like the one example I just spoke of a little bit ago, the reason there was the comprehensive plan designated this particular area as suburban neighborhood was so that there could be consideration for some kind of transition, you know, from higher density to lower density.
Right.
And so that you weren't putting high density right on top of single family homes and parcels. But there's never been any real consideration of transition. Or the idea that that suburban neighborhood designated in the comprehensive plan really kind of represents a buffer between the higher density and the lower density. But what I've seen, and this is my 10th year as an elected official, is developers come in and they express what they want to do, and then it's just a matter of, well, okay, then we'll just rezone the comprehensive plan, and I mean, we'll just amend the comprehensive plan and amend the zoning ordinance, and then you can put what you want there. So there hasn't, you know, I mean, I'm sure there's been some, because I certainly haven't been party to everything that's presented to the city, but oftentimes it's, you know, it's just, this is what we want to do, and it's like, okay, then we can just amend everything. It's pretty easy to comply with the comprehensive plan when you just keep changing it.
Yeah. Well, what do you think the reason is? Like, why do people care to comply with what the developers are looking for?
Well, when I say that, I'm talking about the city and
Yeah, I know.
and
That's what I mean.
possibly elected officials or members of the planning commission. I mean, one thing is, and again, I serve on the county regional planning commission. We don't have it stacked with developers and builders and realtors. And there's not any term limits. So these people can stay on the planning commission or stay on the board of zoning appeals for 25 years if they want.
Mm.
And it's difficult to the planning commission stage when at least a couple of them are builders. And there's been realtors in the past. And so that's the first problem.
Right.
And then it gets political when it goes to the city council, but plain and simple, you know, and I know there's been times when city staff has told the city council that this does not comply with the comprehensive plan. This does not comply with the zoning ordinance. And they've gone right ahead and approved it anyway.
Mm.
And
Has there ever been a lawsuit brought by the community?
no, because these people aren't filthy rich, you know, they just know. And that their only recourse is to appeal to Paul, who on occasion tells them it's fine, or take them to court. And
Yeah.
that's it.
And honestly, on a zoning decision, a rezoning decision, there's not much likelihood that even if you take it to court, that it would be reversed. It's,
Right.
The courts give tremendous breadth of discretion to the city council in making zoning decisions. So it's not like they would, they've not really that good a recourse for anything that's a rezoning thing.
No, they've got a lot
Other
of
than
things going on.
other than to not elect them next time.
Well, everyone on the planning commission is appointed with the exception
Yeah.
of the council member.
Yeah. Though the rezoning decision is made by the city council. I know it's reviewed at the planning commission level, but and so it does seem like planning commissioners stay in office an awful long time. I mean, they get appointed and they stay there forever.
Even though mayors change, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I look forward to learning more about that. Like I said, we, we hear all sorts of things and all different sides of discussions. And so it's hard to figure out too, because, some of it, the best we can do is, assuming that we are going to go to the effort to update the documents, the best we can do is write it the way it's supposed to be written and hope that it's interpreted and used and implemented in the way it's supposed to be implemented, and go from there. I'm wondering, with the idea of, kind of a variety of characters, and, when you really look at it and boil it down, and the city down into kind of the different areas. I mean, obviously the historic districts and historic areas of the city, have a clear and discernible character, but even within those historic areas, there's a gradation of character, from the highest intensity around the square, sort of coming out from the, through the residential areas, through the neighborhoods, and what then would have been the, more agricultural edge that's now being developed, or has been developed in a more suburban way. But I wonder, kind of back to my question before, recognizing that there's not typically a one size fits all, and there is a market for conventional suburban development still. I mean, you see, houses sell when they come up for sale, even in the most conventional of neighborhoods. It seems, and the idea of converting every strip commercial highway to some, walkable mixed use thing, it tends to be unrealistic. In that, I remember when we were working on the James Campbell plan, even, we focus on certain nodes where you might have that. But if you took the entire land mass of James Campbell corridor and sort of curled it on itself and made one area instead of a linear area, and overlay that on downtown, it was like 4 of downtowns probably, and so there's a limited market for that. And so trying to figure out, how comfortable people are. I mean, when the people we've talked to so far, everybody seems on board with the idea of kind of going in this new direction and setting Columbia apart as a place where, that you get new neighborhoods, and neighborhoods have character, and that reminds you of the most beloved parts of the city and all of that. And that's the way you compete. You can't necessarily compete, or maybe you can, but maybe you don't want to compete with Spring Hill at its own game, for instance. Spring Hill's doing that all day long. And how does somebody pick Columbia over Spring Hill if you just have the same exact product that you're offering there? Well, Spring Hill's a little closer into the city, right? Closer to Nashville, closer to Franklin, all that stuff. So how do you say, well, pick the Columbia version of this neighborhood over theirs? I don't know. What do you guys think? What's the selling point of Columbia over Spring Hill if your neighborhoods are all the same?
Yeah, I don't think we have much of a selling point at that point if they're all the same.
I know one thing that's attractive to developers is we don't have impact fees.
And Spring Hill does?
Yes.
Yes.
I hope they're high. That's a lot of impact that they're having. Back to our earlier conversation about transportation and things. And in some ways it's an interesting comparison in Spring Hill and Columbia, because in Spring Hill there was no there too much. There was no core, the heart of the city. So and you can it could develop kind of however it chose to, and had its own path, and didn't have to worry about sort of corrupting something that was precious. And you guys do have that burden, but that burden is a gift too, because when you have these conversations, I think people do have an understanding of the specialness of Columbia. And so when we have something to point at, we say, well, what if we had new neighborhoods that are the new version of the neighborhoods that everybody loves. You know, I mean, I think about every city we work in, the historic areas, historic neighborhoods are the most valuable, the highest price per square foot. And how many people do you meet that say, oh, I would love to live in downtown so-and-so, but it's just too expensive. And my only other choice was a conventional suburban neighborhood that doesn't resemble that at all, except for the fact that it provides housing for people. Those are the two similarities, you know, houses. And so, you know, what if every new neighborhood in Columbia just felt like an extension of the historic core in its layout, and you know, has a newer version of, you know, we were talking architecture last time, and you know, talking about more contemporary, more modern architecture being incorporated. And when you go to a historic district, I mean, one of the things you can see, we think of them all as historic styles, but you can look at Victorian architecture and craftsman architecture and, you know, various styles. Those really are time frames. A lot of them, some of them overlap, but a lot of them you can say, well, this happened from this period to that period, and on and on. And so maybe the new neighborhoods, everything about them is, you know, in its character and makeup is similar to the historic neighborhoods, and the architecture is just the new version of whatever Columbia architecture is in 2020 and beyond. How unique would that be? What a story you'd have to tell, what a product you'd have to sell if that were the case.
I think Columbia, the new fire hall, what was that reference factory?
I don't know, cartoons?
One of the older fire halls downtown.
It's kind of cool, Brian. They just built a new fire hall out on Bear Creek Pike, and they made the design look like what a historic fire hall should look like. It doesn't look like your typical suburban fire hall. So that's kind of maybe an example of Columbia taking a step towards appreciating the old design and kind of trying to replicate that in maybe suburban areas like Bear Creek.
Is that fire station number 3?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I'm looking at a picture of it here on the internet. And it's a rendering. Does it actually look like that when it got built? I see a rendering. It looks really awesome.
Yeah, they just built it.
Wow.
It's open now.
And I wonder, again, back to this idea of the visual preference survey, if you ask people of Columbia, what's your favorite fire station in the city? What do you think they might say?
Maybe that one, because it looks so good.
Yeah, exactly. And that fire station sent a message. When you drive past that, when you come in to the city and you're going down Bear Creek Pike, if that's where it is, and you see that fire station, it's actually in some ways even more special because it's new. Because you see a historic fire station and you expect it to look cool, right? You see a new fire station, you expect it to look gross, you know, most places. And here, that sends a message that Columbia, we're doing something special, we're doing something different. And, you know, it's important for us to, you know, to think about that. Does everyone understand that added value to the city at large? You know, a great example. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to save this rendering, and then I'm going to find a picture of the new one and try to compare.
And it kind of goes back to, like, you think of the courthouse, you know, back then in the early 1900s, you know, when you would build a civic building, you know, like our old school buildings, the way they used to look, and those designs, I mean, you built it as a sense of pride, not just something that was cookie cutter, I guess, so to speak. So it's kind of cool to see that again.
You got it. Yeah, I mean, municipal buildings were the finest buildings. They were the ones of the best design, which is rarely the case these days, unfortunately. And so it's nearly like, you know, you guys have done a good job. You set the standard so that when developers come in and they get beat up, you know, by the design review board or whatever, you say, hey, we're practicing what we preach. Look at our new fire station. You know, we could have done something cheap. We could have done some metal Butler building or whatever, and, you know, but we didn't. Why did y'all do that? Why did y'all make something so special?
Paul?
Well, they were replicating one of the original fire halls that were downtown, and it's not every day you get to build a a facility like that. So they wanted to make something that would stand the test of time and forever be something everybody would, enjoy. A metal building would have been, pretty quick and easy and much cheaper, as you said. The property also gives a bad representation of who we are.
Yep, that's good. I found the built image of it, and it looks as good as the rendering. So that's great. It didn't get value engineered too much. Cool. That's great. So, what do you think? Are there barriers to development in the city? Are there things keeping people from developing who want to? Or is it pretty much open for business, free for all?
I think it's just a free for all.
Yeah.
But if you, I mean, if you don't have expertise, yeah, I mean, there's going to be some bumps in the road. I mean, we've had to, babysit some people that are new to the process. I mean, way more than we should have to. If someone who is more experienced with land development, whether it be in Columbia or elsewhere, you're going to be able to come in and do something here.
What about this idea, especially sort of post-COVID? I know the housing market is hot, but commercial and other things are really struggling. The idea of having things in place for smaller scale builders or developers, even like what we've seen in some other cities are doing, sort of this idea of lean development, so that it really democratizes development and allows for people who may not be big developers to do stuff that that a big developer wouldn't do. It wouldn't have the character that you're looking for. Like probably a good example would be like an infill property. Sometimes usually little infill projects are more of a mom and pop kind of somebody who had a vision for a little piece of property. But they come in, they've got all the same fees and standards and process as if you're a big developer who's doing $100 million project, and they just don't really know what to do. And so all of a sudden, what happens? First thing, they don't get professionals to help them. So the architects or the designers or whoever are now out of the equation because they had to use that money for the process or for the fees. And so thinking about like in your arts district or in the downtown areas where you're trying to encourage, really unique and special kind of things, or, just smaller scale, incremental development in, some of the different neighborhoods where you'd like to see some stuff happen. Can you imagine a process by which that you might simplify or make it easier or less expensive for a small scale person to come in and do something?
I do think we have a lot of locations for infill and those smaller developments that you're talking about. It would be nice to be able to offer them something, some kind of carrot to do that, whether it be time or money. I mean, I feel our process is fairly easy now. So we have to think, what could we do to promote that, and how can we make that easier for them? Because it is odd that they do have the same regulations that a 500 lot subdivision has.
And on that same note, there's some infill areas where, the current zoning might get things correct for the most part, but sometimes there might be differences in, setbacks, like things that are really black and white that can't be reconciled. And so you end up with this weird, they're following the code, but it doesn't fit with anything else. Or you'll get, something that just doesn't fit just based on character as well. Sometimes that's a good thing, but sometimes not so much.
And one thing, Brian, I've never seen in a zoning code except ours. This is the only zoning code I've ever seen that it doesn't allow existing structures to align with neighboring structures on the block. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's, I know we were talking earlier about the driveways and how 20 feet is too limited, but it's, you know, it's like a suburban context zoning code we're trying to apply to infill. And, you know, all the houses are 10 feet and the zoning says you have to have a 35-foot setback for a front setback. That kind of creates an inconsistency in the rhythm. And most zoning codes allow you to align with neighboring structures if it's 100 feet on each side or something like that. But ours, it doesn't have that provision to do that in certain, well, in the whole city.
Got it.
And, you know, another barrier I think that we get ourselves into is, you know, without the standards that we have now, you know, you have an old corner store and you want to redo it or add on a little bit to it. Well, you have to bring that up to standard, and that is a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because if they don't have the land to make that happen, then, well, now we're stuck with a substandard structure for essentially all of eternity, whereas we could get something that's better, that doesn't meet the code outright. I think there needs to be some flexibility for redevelopment and infill on some of these parcels that wouldn't support, you know, new development outright. They're just not big enough.
We just ran into this in Franklin actually, because they're doing one of the ideas was to do like a code cleanup after a year or so, and so it allowed the elected officials to not sort of nitpick and really just feel like everything had to be perfect before they adopted it, while a bunch of new development came through that didn't have the new standards to guide it. And so one of the things that they were starting to think about changing was some of the standards related to parking location, for instance, in a sort of a suburban retrofit condition. So putting the parking in the rear and things. And what they were finding is in those situations that some of the parcels were so small because they were like, let's say an out parcel or something in front of a strip center, that they couldn't figure out, and I argue that it's really a design problem and they just didn't have the right people helping them figure it out. But nonetheless, let's just say it was correct, that they couldn't figure out what to do with the parking to meet the standards, which meant then they couldn't redevelop because they were now bound by the new ordinance. Now, what I would suggest is that rather than changing the standards, you actually, in those instances, if the new design is following and keeping with the character that you're looking for, then that's where you make an exception. That's where you get a variance or whatever. You're not in this case proving a hardship. You're actually proving that you're helping the city achieve its vision for the future. As a sort of a different way to grant that, you know, and I'm saying this just as a, you know, planner shooting from the hip right now. So my zoning guru sitting next to me has his arms crossed. So hopefully it's just because he's digesting his lunch and not grimacing about what I'm saying. So, but I think those are the kinds of things that we need to think about, because there will be exceptions to rules that make better development. But if we set the rules and the standards to accommodate those exceptions, then everything that isn't an exception now has a lesser standard as well. And so I think figuring out the exceptions on a case-by-case basis rather than adjusting the ordinance is my recommendation. Right now we use, you know, let's say the PUD as the norm, you know, as opposed to an exception. And so here I would say, you know, like some places we work, it's literally, they can count on one hand how many variances or waivers or whatever they call it, whatever state we're in, how many they've granted in the past 20 years on one hand, right? Whereas in Franklin, you have the modification of standards, which is essentially a variance or whatnot, and you go in and it's like normal. They're just like, just don't ask for more than about 12. It's more than 12, the meeting gets too long. So no more. And it's like, really? Yeah, every development has modification of standards? Like I have standards to Sue's earlier point. So we have to make sure we're thinking about those unintended consequences, and making sure we have a way to address them, but still making sure that the ordinance, the code is strong enough to give us what we want in the end. All right, let's see what else we have. Oh, I think I wrote down something I wanted to ask you all about here on my notes. Hold on one second. I know this. So the example I had in my mind on small scale development was like in right next to that building with the upside down sign, just out of downtown, you know. I saw on the internet this amazing looking, it's like a little live work or mixed use building of some sort. It looked like new construction, but was awesome and fit in the historic character. Has a gray storefront on the ground floor. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
And next to Ted's.
Next to Ted's, yep. To the left of Ted's.
Is it the Bundy's? Is it the Thai restaurant or is
That's
it
what I was wondering.
Is that where the shoot, is that where
Is
the
that
shoot
what's new
shop was?
construction of precinct?
Yeah, I think it was probably Bundy's. It's a Thai restaurant with a piano bar upstairs. That was, yeah, they demolished that building and then built a new.
The city actually did that
Yeah.
project.
Yeah, the city, or did we demolish?
It was the old shoe store, it collapsed right before
Yeah.
Mule Day, and then the city
We took it.
took it on and redeveloped it and sold it.
There's also the one next to that
It's not the investment. bank,
Paul
is it?
Varney did as well.
Did both of them.
It has the Asian restaurant and lounge in it right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lundy.
Because that's what I imagine like a small scale developer would have come in and done that. But it sounds like the city ended up doing something, which is very interesting to me. I want to know more about that. Anybody?
So I believe that property had some property maintenance issues and
Mhm.
it actually, the front of the building collapsed, like I said, right before a Mule Day event, had to be cleaned up. And I can't remember how the city ended up acquiring the property, whether it was
Condemned it.
condemned in
regulated it, yeah.
taxes or purchased, but kind of there was a lot of discussion at the city council level about what to do. You know, do you sell the piece of property? Do you try to fix it up and then sell it? And I believe the end result was just kind of repairing a shell there and making it fit the area, and then turned around and sold the shell, and it was built out for the restaurant and I guess it's a
They
residential.
did
above.
some structural repair as well,
Yeah,
and
there's
then,
shoring and different things.
yeah. But yeah, basically it was just, yeah, the outside, fix up the outside and make the building viable and then sell it. And they developed, you know, the box build out for themselves.
So what mechanism did you guys use? Like what agency or entity did the city's part of the development?
It's the industrial development.
I think it might have just been the city,
Yeah,
because I think we acquired it it was a city property. It was not a private property. We had acquired that property.
So I get maybe a different way to
We
say
acquired the
it.
property.
Maybe a different way to say it. Who was the person who called the contractors to do the shell, to build it? What
City
department?
City manager.
Yeah, it was through the city manager's office. They hired an architect and then bid out the project.
Wow, that's really interesting. I love that you guys did that. It was so proactive, and the results are incredible. Just try to think about, because one of the cities that I admire so much has done such an amazing job of redevelopment, of setting its own path forward with character and all that is Carmel, Indiana. And in spite of the fact that it happens to be the roundabout capital of America now, they built more roundabouts than any other city. That's not the thing that's the most impressive. If you go and look at like the Arts District and their Monon Trail development, mixed use development stuff, the city has this redevelopment authority, like a agency. It's part of the city, but it's set up and allowed to do development. It does these sort of public-private partnerships with developers, so it'll get control of property either through a trade or acquire property, and then it'll put the property in the deal, and then the developers come in and do the development, execute the development, because they don't have the land costs they have to deal with. The city has 100% control and authority over everything from the design related things. So it's got to pass not just the design review board with some guidelines. It's like the city signs off on the design and is involved in it. And the built results have been incredible and have transformed that city. It was already a successful suburban location outside of Indianapolis, but now it actually has a high quality downtown where they had none before, and it's awesome. So kudos to you guys for doing that. That's incredible.
I think in Indiana we call that the TIF board, the Redevelopment Commission, by state statute. And so Carmel is one of those cities that they have that TIF board. The mayor Jim Brainerd, he oversees it, and I know they built something called the Palladium. It costs $175 million for one building.
Yeah, that's the concert hall, the Arts District, or the Arts.
And I remember with that Palladium, to get a beam, one of the beams was needed to be looked at. It was $50,000. But it works well in places like Carmel because they've taken on a lot of debt from their TIF districts to pay for new development. But it's so affluent, it'll pay for itself over time.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, in Tennessee, we don't have those kind of mechanisms to do that. It's kind of.
I think we have TIF districts in Tennessee.
We do,
but they're limited in scale. Like Indiana, the way they have TIF districts is there's just basically the redevelopment commission gets to oversee all the money, and I believe in Tennessee you have to make a case for blight and things of that nature to create a TIF district.
Yeah, it's pretty unusual the way they do it in Carmel for sure, and it's near like the mayor and this one guy who runs it.
That's right.
Like, and they're like outside of all governmental regulations. They don't have to deal with zoning. They don't have to do anything.
They got their own zoning for it,
which is good in the right hands. They've done incredible things, but it could also be really bad, and they've done an awesome job. So
just don't talk to their clerk treasurer.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That's right.
I know her. So.
All right. So let's see. I think we've covered probably most of the rest of our questions right now, because we don't have any developers in the room. What's missing in Columbia? What kind of places, of uses, of attractions, of like what do we need in Columbia to make it even better than it is?
I think you hit it earlier with the ability to have the mixed use and the mixed type of housing in the same development without having to go through the PUD process. And that paired with usable open space. So, you talked about it earlier, but we have so many areas of open space that are not that usable. And I think the communities and neighborhoods would really like something that could be used as opposed to just somebody trying to meet a percentage on a chart.
Yeah, we get, the thing that we get most often that causes problems for any number of reasons is just the piece by piece approach. I mean, we have subdivisions that are probably in their you know, 12th, 15th plat at this point. You know, it would be 20, 30 lots at a time, 20, 30 lots at a time. So you get 5,000 feet of open space. Yay. You know, versus if you concentrate that, and you have that in the foresight, then we can sort of make an accommodation for that. But it's hard because we haven't had the large scale master planning on the front end. Typically it comes afterwards here, at least recently.
And in the developer's defense, they don't own all the properties around at the time. They purchase these and add it to the existing developments as they go. So the way to manage that would be nice.
Wait, say that part again?
So like if it's like some of the large scale developments, they'll come in with sections of plats and, you know, they develop the area that they own, but they don't own all the farms or properties around. And then they'll end up acquiring those and expanding the neighborhood, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 different parcels.
Yeah. Yeah, they actually, same thing just happened here. Unbelievable. As big as West Haven is, 1,500 acres. Southern Lane Company just bought the farm next to it. So now they own all the way up to the next intersection. But because there was an overall cohesive vision and a clear neighborhood structure, the new portion just ties right in and will clearly be a part of the neighborhood, and meet some needs that aren't met in the rest of the neighborhood. They're going to have some senior kind of assisted kind of stuff as well, that would feel like part of the neighborhood, and some other things. So I definitely understand that. Have you guys thought about being so bold, now that you've gotten me excited with your proactiveness, about actually having not only zoning that supports you know, kind of what you want for the future and for the vision, but actually creating some plans that are pre-approved for properties that are in these areas, so that, you know, the owner doesn't have to do it. There's no cost to the owner to do it, but the plan is approved. And so literally the owner could sell the property, the developer could have the, you know, has the plan, it's approved, they passed their first round of process with the city already, and now they really just have to go start doing, you know, whatever the next step is in Columbia, site plan or you know, engineering or whatever, as a way to really incentivize and facilitate that. You think about, like, out in California, they have this concept called specific plans, and those specific plans are required. They are commissioned, and for, you know, property that the city doesn't even own. But once the specific plan is drawn for your property, that is the plan, and that's how it will be built. It's like a whole nother level. This is something that is kind of a good in between. It's proactive without being, you know, oppressive. It gives somebody an option and an incentive to follow exactly what you have in mind, and also could allow it to be, you know, you could design it like, sometimes we'll do a plan for a developer that will incorporate multiple properties, and but they may not own them all, but they think, oh, well, I'll probably buy that one. And so we'll actually draw the plan to respect property lines. And so there's natural breaks in phasing and in the neighborhood structure, that so one piece of property isn't, it's not, the whole development's not dependent on it, and it won't seem like something's missing if it never comes in. But if it does come in, it's ready to go. And so you can design this in a way that actually accommodated and understood that they might buy piece by piece, or somebody else might buy the other piece, and they can then still match up. Have you guys ever thought about doing something like that?
No.
No.
That is proactive.
Paul, what do you think? Is it Paul still on here?
I think we lost him for a second.
Oh man, I better write that idea down, and so otherwise I'll forget it. I'd love to.
But we see the PUDs that are approved, they, you know, when a different developer picks them up, I mean, they want to change them from the beginning. So I don't know, you know, if that would be received well, you know, if that time delay would be worth it for them, but, you know, it's definitely something to think about.
I think
Yeah.
it may be problematic in some places anyway. I don't know that you could do it everywhere.
Yeah, it would definitely have to be a location specific, I agree.
Yeah.
Based on your resources as well, just because it's not inexpensive to do it for sure. Certain parcels, you know, are in key locations, I think, and that's really the kinds of things that you want to one or two, however many. So
We've got some scenarios too where a developer will buy the property, will buy a larger parcel, and then split it up between different builders and developers.
yes. Yeah, and one of the things, a measure of success for me is going forward of this ordinance is if we can have development that occurs that has actually multiple sub-developers, but you can't tell. It doesn't feel like
Yeah.
it's not obvious. I think that would be a big win.
Yes.
Great.
I guess to just piggyback on what's Columbia's missing is, I think if you pull the demographics of the city and the household income of the city, and I know the city just recently got into an agreement with a retail recruiter. I mean, certainly there's more opportunity for retail just based off the proposed population growth and demographics of the city. Again, it's pretty clear a lot of the retail is lost to leakage to Spring Hill to the north. But I think there's a lot more opportunity for renewed retail opportunities.
Yeah, and you know, one thing that I will say is as time goes on, I think you'll start to see that, you know, we're at a transition point right now, and I mentioned this in the presentation last night, is, you know, the changing preferences are so, you know, are so sharp that, you know, I mean, you talk to young people now and they're just like, ugh, no way would I ever go to a chain. Ugh, I don't want to drive anywhere. Yuck, you know, and you're not going to get the I'm not going to drive anywhere, folks, because you guys don't have transit. So, you know, you've got to, well, besides the trolley, I forgot about that, but nonetheless, you're not going to get the hardcore. I don't want to drive anywhere. But those who are young enough and find themselves able to live in Columbia are really going to gravitate towards those authentic experiences. And thankfully, you guys have that in your core already in the downtown. And, you know, how do we, at a certain point, downtown will, you know, reach its capacity. You know, the other thing that downtown seems to be missing right now is some more residential opportunities besides the detached single family. So I imagine that you'll start to see some densification in and around the square. And so when we do that, you know, where else might we have retail and post-COVID retail? You know, retail's struggling right now, but I was talking to one of our national experts as an economist, and he was saying that all the latest data and research is showing that all these people who are getting fired and laid off are starting their own businesses. And so having small scale incubator kind of space becomes really important. And if you can become the hub for those kind of ventures, I think that it's, you know, it adds interest, variety, additional retail opportunities that people are looking for. And you know, some tax base. I mean, certainly for a while it'll be tricky for them to pay a lot of money. But if you become the place where people are starting these businesses, they tend to, you know, they'll grow into a bigger space and they'll, you know, stay, you know, close by, or maybe they'll. I love the fact that you guys are actually getting things that started in Nashville or Franklin, and now you guys are getting them, you know, just sort of showing kind of how strong your market is here, your demographics are. And I can imagine if we create a place that is an incubator for new businesses and things, you actually will start to get the inverse. So people are starting stuff in Columbia, and now they're going to open their second location in Franklin or Nashville, and it'll be kind of really neat to see. All right. I think we probably are at our time frame. Oh, we still got a few minutes.
Brian, it's
Yes.
Susan. If I may share something.
Please.
I'm going back a number of years, of course, 30 plus years. But when Saturn Corporation first came in here, of course, that's in the county. There are areas up there, of course, that are in Spring Hill's urban growth boundary. But we've got that large property across from General Motors now that's going to be the site of the county's industrial development board is established a site there for what's called Innovation Business and Research Park, which is about half the size of Cummins Park in Alabama. And I can remember, because I moved down here in 1988, my husband was at Saturn, and it just amazed me. And there was something like, for, you know, at this time Saturn had 6,000 or 7,000 employees, much different than today. But anyway, there was about 40% of them, and I'm wondering if the same thing is going to occur with innovation, that they didn't, I mean, you know, there's a place for mixed development, for walkability, and I agree with all that, but just to show you that large percentage of them that worked for Saturn, they wanted to be out in the country, they wanted to be out on the farm. There were Saturn families that we knew of that commuted to Saturn from Hickman County, from Lewis County, from Rutherford County, Williamson County, but a lot of them wanted to be out in the country. And so just something to keep in mind, that, you know, there are definitely those that are looking for the walkability and the mixed development and being in closer proximity to retail and commercial. But there are also those that still want larger homes, larger lots and farms. I just would appreciate it if you would bear that in mind, that I think there does need to be consideration for that in places.
Yes,
throughout the city.
I totally agree. And I'm glad you said that, because I often don't talk about that as much as I should. You know, because the other stuff is new, and, you know, zoning doesn't support it in most places we work, and it's, you know, it's nearly like a whole process of education to even figure out a way to talk about it or to allow it to happen. It gets so much more of the airtime when I'm talking about it. But I totally agree. You know, it's like there are people who, you know, the walkable, you know, neighborhood, being close to your neighbors, all of that stuff, just, it isn't for them. You know, they want to have, you know, some land. They want to have a yard for their dogs to run around in. They want to have some chickens or whatever the case may be, or just some solitude, you know, some quiet. And that's for sure. So, you know, back to one of the things I mentioned yesterday or last night was, you know, having something for everyone. It isn't a one size fits all. And I need to be careful when I'm talking about this stuff, because I can have people leave the discussion with the impression that I'm suggesting that this one thing that we talk so much about is that one size that fits all. And that isn't my intention, for sure. What I often talk about too is in most places we work, if you look at the current sort of as-built condition of the city, there is tons and tons of conventional suburban. There's often a lot of, you know, rural residential kind of stuff. There may be, if they're lucky, a historic core, a historic district or something like that, but there isn't much, if any, of the other stuff. And so, you know, that's the reason why it gets so much focus in discussions. But in our upcoming presentations and discussions, I'll make sure that I give that its proper representation, because, and especially in a place like Columbia, you know, there are people who have been there for a long time before all the newcomers have come, and you know, they were there because it was more rural and you know, kind of out there, and then there are newcomers who want that too, and so we need to make sure it's represented. So I really appreciate you reminding me.
You can't have a diverse, you ask people a lot of times, do you want a diverse community? And oftentimes they'll say, yeah, we want a diverse community, but you can't have a diverse community without a diverse housing stock.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that means even the biggest, you know, do you have many people down there who do, you know, kind of hobby farms or sort of, you know, farmettes or anything like that?
Yeah,
there's a guy in Rutherford Lane. I think he has something to do with pets. You met him.
there's a lot of people out off Carter's Creek Pike and where else was I going to say? Where they're out there and they have larger parcels or larger subdivisions, like, of course, now that's in the county, like Charleston Farms and Polo Fields. But what a lot of those people like is they've got their larger estate homes and lots. I mean, some of them have 5 acres and more, but yet they're still close enough to commercial. They're not that far from a Shell station. They're not that far from, you know, and I think Neapolis area, and I mean, maybe you're retail individual that you're hiring, I think there really could be an advantage to building up more retail around the Neapolis area. But there's a lot of, my point was, there are a lot of people out that way on the west side and on the east side that have the larger lots and parcels, but yet they're still close enough to the retail and commercial that they need.
Yeah, we actually did a small private development project outside of Charleston, and here it was, the idea was large lots, large houses on large lots, but we wanted to kind of, in the spirit of Charleston and its sort of wonderful placemaking and community sort of neighborhood feeling, we actually designed it so that the front of the houses and the way the lots were laid out, they kind of came together. So if you're on your front porch, you felt like you're in a sort of a small scale neighborhood, and there was a green in the middle, and the house is all faced onto the green space. When you went into your back porch, though, the way the lots were laid out, you had this huge lot that backed up to marsh and this and that and the other. So it was like the best of both worlds. You still had a sense of community when you wanted it, but you had the sense of solitude and privacy as well. And so the one thing that I always do talk about when we're talking about larger scale, larger lot development, is that there are opportunities there for uniqueness and creativity as well. You know, that the buyers appreciate, if you think about it. So we'll definitely start representing that side of the spectrum as well.
And one last thing, if I may, Brian, I know you've got to wrap up. A lot of developers are so preoccupied with high density and how many homes they can cram in that they do very little in terms of amenities and open space and green space. And I know people would appreciate more, I mean, as I said before, open space, not meaning a detention pond. And I just think there needs to be more of that.
Yeah, we definitely, our zoning ordinances focus on having clear definitions and types of civic spaces, and so there's really there's no room for that left over. I mean, that's just lazy design, honestly. When people do that, there's no sense in that. What I always tell when working on private development projects, I always tell the engineers, I say, look, I don't want a pond unless I want a pond. Like, if the pond makes sense as part of a neighborhood or something like that, and then we want it to be an amenity or here or there, wherever, like, let's figure it out. But there are other ways that we can deal with stormwater, and there are other ways we can deal with some of the engineering solutions. And so let's design the neighborhood first, figure out what our needs are, and then you tweak the design and the layout to accommodate what, you know, sort of infrastructure needs you have. But it can't just be kind of the development being led around by the engineering. Is kind of our take on it. So Don't you agree, Glenn?
I do.
One other thing, so, we have about, I think, 3 or 4 rivers, streams in the city that have FEMA flood designation. And so, we have, really good, our Tennessee flood insurance program, stipulations on what we're supposed to require there. We have some stuff for unstudied areas. I think with that, maybe look at having those areas that are unstudied called out, and maybe require something with that, that gives it a little bit more weight than just adhering to like a buffer ordinance or et cetera. But
So basically, like you might require a traffic study for a new development if
Right,
it's in
right.
an area that could cause traffic issues. You would say if you're in a certain area, proximity to these floodplains, then you need to do your own.
right, yeah, and they're not a designated FEMA flood hazard area, but if you put a house right up against a creek, there could and there very will, probably will be, issues. Creeks are made to flood. They do flood. So the question is, how far away do we need to be? We've gotten into it in a couple spots here recently, just with development. Luckily, we've been able to require flood studies, but we'd like to have it be a little bit more defined. And that may give us a little bit of ammunition to then get funding to actually add those into a flood study in the future.
Yeah, one of the things too that we run into all the time is, especially these days, and with the types of development clients that we tend to have, they want to do cool stuff that's innovative and unique and cutting edge and beyond just the basics, sort of meeting the basic standards. And so, a lot of our projects have all these sustainable stormwater techniques as built into them, but a lot of the cities we work in don't have those in their sort of approved toolbox. Or if they do, you can do them, but they have to be redundant to a conventional system, which obviously no one wants to do because that's twice the cost. Or, there's sort of extra hurdles to do these better things. And so I'm just immediately thinking about always not a one size fits all, because like having a consistent buffer in a particular, along any body of water, there's some areas where you actually want the buffer to be more, and some areas where it doesn't matter at all, and so trying to figure out kind of how to think through, any standards that go along with that will require some good discussion with you all. But to your point also, I think what we've been scoped to do right now isn't necessarily to get into, detailed zoning provisions and things regarding that kind of stuff. But I think we can make sure that the ordinance is set up to accept, the results of those sort of further studies, that get into, if it requires. I mean, we know how to allow for in the zoning ordinance and in the subdivision standards and stuff, how to allow for these techniques. But if it's, more of a quantitative, sort of analysis, so that takes a whole nother level of focus and concentration, which may have been what you were getting at. Do y'all have the river modeled and all that, and when people are building in the floodplain or near enough to the floodplain that they have to plug their development into the model?
No,
Oh.
no, we don't ourselves don't have any modeling, aside from just kind of verification, models when we're looking at somebody wants to build something. But yeah, no, we don't have anything really.
We did a project on the Cumberland in Nashville years ago, a development project, and it was pretty neat. They had it all modeled, and one of the requirements, I mean, a lot of our site was in the floodplain, and so we had to show what the impacts would be downstream and all that, and so we plugged a model of our development into their overall model. It was pretty neat to start to see how that worked. But I think, really getting into that with you guys about what kind of standards for, I mean, let's just say, for instance, back to your point about the proximity to the floodplain. You're not in the floodplain, but you're near it and near enough to have some negative impacts maybe. There maybe that's where you have some requirements for pervious kind of stuff, or sustainable stormwater treatments and those kinds of things that can allow people to get maybe a little closer than they would have otherwise if we were just doing it in the conventional way. So I don't want to overcomplicate the ordinance or anything for sure, and scope creep on ourselves, but those kind of things are exciting to me. So.
Okay.
Brian, while you're speaking about buffers, there have been a number of instances where we've asked for the existing natural features to be preserved between developments and existing homes. And instead, we've asked them to designate so many feet of buffer and then to protect the mature canopy line. But instead, they've torn out every single tree, and then they offer the people some saplings. That's ridiculous. So I'd like to see if something could be done to require, because actually I had a discussion with an engineer that was working for a developer who said that they would try to preserve as many trees as they could, and as it turned out, then when the plan was submitted, it didn't show any preservation as such, and they have torn out all the trees. And that's happened on more than one occasion. I've run into that, and I've had many, many complaints about that. And in my mind, the requirement of a buffer to preserve those natural features should be a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, asking them to do it and saying we sure would like it if you did and all that stuff, will definitely not get you where you need to be. We'll have to have standards and tree save and other natural feature kind of requirements if you're going to have any hope of getting it. So
it's also ended up damaging homes surrounding contiguous homes and properties.
All right. Well, this has been great. A lot of good notes here I have. I appreciate all of y'all's input and time. Let's see what's coming up next. Do we have any more today? Any more meetings? Architecture, land and development. I think the next meeting is, it doesn't say when it is. I have housing and neighborhoods. Is that Saturday? I bet that's tomorrow.
Saturday, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, that's at 1.
All right, well, you guys go and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. It is lovely here in Franklin. The weather is incredible. I hope it is there as well. And we'll reconvene soon. And please, Sue, since you're the only non-staff or consultant person here, please tell people to come and participate. I think you have incredible insight and valuable input, and as does James. But I think probably the rest of the city would hope that more than just the two of you and the consultants and staff did this new zoning ordinance together. So let people know.
Okay.
All right. Y'all have a good one.
Thank you.
Bless you.
Bye-bye.